The reason we're here in the Burren, in this beautiful environment at the Burren School of Art, is because culture is the fourth pillar of sustainability, as we're discovering. And as Deirdre O'Mahony, our featured artist, told us last night, artists have the ability to make us see what we can't normally see. And if we can understand it with the heart, that will move us to action.
Identified really clearly an idea of artistic practice that's in a sense very different from what we might associate with the usual idea of art practice, the making of art objects. It's a different model. It's a model of practice that tries to re-engage different publics, different communities with what's happening in the world today. And one of the things that artists are very good at is making visible things that we don't normally see. And something like climate change, something like food security, it's very difficult to grasp. So in essence, taking a potato and using the humble spud to speak about issues like unsustainability in terms of where does our food come from, what do we as individuals need to do to contribute in some way towards producing food, perhaps at home, perhaps in our gardens, perhaps in containers like the ones that you see around you here. SIP is an international development agency that is looking at the potential of the potato as a food that is outside the futures market and therefore very relevant to sustaining poorer communities around the world. So Francis has been working with them, and I in turn had started a project called the XPO here in County Clare, which revived a rural post office as a social and cultural hub. So in the course of the XPO project, I began a lot of conversations with farmers around how to grow things, and a particular topic of interest was how to grow potatoes. And I realized that that knowledge of how to grow potatoes simply in small gardens was deeply relevant to the growing grow-it-yourself movement in Ireland. So I began to think about what role artists could play in translating or making visible that knowledge to urban populations. And so the Spud project began. I worked with different artists, with an animator, to make a 3D animation on how to grow potatoes in lazy beds, and with various curators and public art agencies really excavating and looking at the history of the potato, not just in Ireland, but also on an international level. And so part of what I've been looking at is this notion of growing potatoes in containers. So when Francis and I decided to try and crystallize our conversations, which have been ongoing for the past 5 years, and we were invited to do something for this 20th anniversary of the Burren College of Art, we came up with the idea of the potato batata. Two tubers that both originate in the Andes, but are both botanically completely different.
This seminar and exhibition really is showcasing what we see as our very deliberate step into the next 10 years of the college, which will be very much to do with artists and art and the environment, and bringing a voice and a new way of looking at environmental issues, ecological issues, and issues of sustainability. We started off as an art school purely for the education of artists, visual artists in this case, but as the years have gone on, and our experience over 20 years has been really what the place is an incubator of creativity really. And it's to do with the Burren, it's to do with the place and the power of a place if you allow yourself to open up to it and to be affected by it. Being in the Burren, you're so aware of the notions of interdependence and of how we are living in such an interconnected system that is so very delicate. You know, one imbalance somewhere can upset the whole thing. So the Burren is like a little microcosm of how we are globally, really. And it's a great place to study the ecosystem, to study how we are working with and are not working against the planet, and to use it as an example really for bigger global issues. So with that in mind, and knowing the power that artists have to allow great issues to be seen, not to be seen, but to be seen and felt in a different way perhaps than words and logic can do. We have set up a program, an MA in Art and Ecology, and we have Eileen Hutton, actually, who leads that program, was our first doctoral PhD in Art and Ecology, first one in Ireland, so we're really proud about that. And she's a great example of how artists can take issues and present them in a way that make them universal.
The term sustainability is most often associated with the natural environment. The origin of the term sustainability and its use can be traced to the United Nations Brundtland Commission report of 1987 and the definition of sustainable development. Though the legs or pillars, as they're often referred to, were termed ecology, economy, and equity, we're most familiar with them represented as the social, environmental, and economic pillars. The fourth pillar, culture, was introduced in a joint policy statement issued by Agenda 21 for Culture and United Cities and Local Governments in 2010. Since then, it has become more widely accepted as an integral component of sustainable development. Looking at the addition of the cultural pillar in the context of the symposium, there are numerous lenses we could use to address the contemporary and future role of the arts. The exhibition is an incredibly thoughtful and elegant example of relational art, as well as a challenging socially engaged practice. And this would be a much longer talk if I were to try and address all the ways in which these practices are examples of cultural vitality. However, my practice is environmentally based. Environmental art is a sweeping term and varies greatly in definition, purpose, and execution. It can reference the early movements of artists such as Alan Sunfist, Nancy Holt, and Richard Long, moving beyond the historical institutions of museums and galleries. It can refer to art that raises awareness of ecological issues or tries to restore balance within a depleted or damaged environment. The term is also applied to site-specific pieces, environmental sculpture, or simply to works that incorporate natural elements. Environmental art can range in overtones from the overtly political, critically activist, feminine and socially engaged, to the romantic and neo-romantic. It can range in its chosen media from photography, installation, sculpture, painting, and drawing, and it is often associated with its beginning point of land art or earthworks. There have been numerous environmentally based projects that have been ameliorative or even redemptive. I'm thinking of Melchin's Revival Field, of any of the Harrison's Reclamation Project, and of Brandon Ballingee's Eco Actions. And these are just a few examples of the ways in which art bridges everyday life and becomes a functional vehicle for change.
Over the course of the different presentations that we had during the symposium, a number of strands emerged. One of the key ones was, what the social function of art in relation to climate change and in relation to action, in relation to moving beyond creating a discourse, creating a discussion, moving beyond that and translating into the possibility for action. And if art is able to move beyond, art builds discourse, builds discussion at best, and one of the big questions was, can it move beyond that, and if so, what do those actions look like? So over the course of the presentations, we had Christian Bettini's presentation of, in terms of the use of food culture as use of spectacle, use of carnival, use of humorous, subversive intervention that highlights the foregrounds and highlights the importance of food through the use of play, through the use of humor, but with a serious undertone.
Food culture is a market and a stomach, a library and a mouth, a brain and a brainstorming center, a laboratory and a language.
Hi, my name is Christian. I'm here in behalf of Food Cultura Foundation. We are a collective of people working between researching and action between food and culture. Our work aims to be playful and out in the street to involve people with the small things, funny or interesting, to provoke some reaction.
This was an exhibition made as a carnival, so instead was a living exhibition. In the first moment you see the big potatoes. The big potatoes was this balloon in the shape of a giant potatoes. Then there's this part where there was the payment to the art procession, a series of moving tables, like a offer, they were altars, where food was offered, gifts inspired by the traditional Andean offering to the potato. I guess this is a good example of an event we created. It's a playful piece. It's going out in the streets, involve thousands of people, and create roots in a place where everybody doesn't know even the name of the original potatoes.
What I want to say to all these people, and I hope they get it, is that I'm always surprised that we have all the information, all the data, all the resource, all the knowledge to make big changes. These are not happening, and I guess there's a lack of poetry. Poetry as an active tool to sparkle all this thing and to start fire and to change things.
Can cultural action, cultural activities build viable alternatives to the current unsustainable economic model that we're currently enmeshed in? And through Oscar Rando's presentation, it was clear that collective action, collective activity can make a difference.
Thank you for your invitation, but sorry for but not to speak English. Christian, help me to my presentation. Thank you very much.
He wants to start this conversation with the two topics you start in the school as well. He's not considering himself as an artist. He really appreciates the artist practice, but as he's interested in make some effort to change things, his help is in organizing and moving and gathering people together to events in the social community in this city close to Barcelona. Most of the people know El Prat because of the airport. The airport take over the 75% of the municipality. That was the area in which, until a few decades ago, was known as the food supply of Barcelona, because they were able to harvesting 9 times a year. And from all this area, there's just 1% left for this agricultural landscape.
El contexto es complicado, pero pese a tener un contexto complicado, tenemos oportunidades.
There's opportunities, and they want to use that, connected to the neighborhood and connected to the land that's left. In the latest year, in the 2,500 hectares left, there was a big project to build Euro Vegas, like a big betting center close to the airport, international airport, that will destroy totally that area.
Vuelvo a la cuestión inicial. ¿Puede ser uno de los pilares la cultura que nos puede llevar a esa ansiada sostenibilidad? Yo creo que sí, pero desde hace mucho tiempo creo que sí, siempre y cuando seamos capaces de movilizarnos a través de la cultura. Entiendo que la cultura tiene que ser un elemento movilizador, un elemento catalizador de cambio, y entonces yo creo que sí que entramos en ese pilar importante para esa sostenibilidad, sobre la que también tengo algún comentario más adelante.
Yeah. So he really trusted the role of culture in allow this changing, but the only way to allow this is by mobilize, getting people together and getting moved through the culture and getting to that. And eventually, well, the project was stopped.
Tenemos unos espacios naturales que aguantan todavía a la presión de la Gran Barcelona y del desarrollo urbanístico de nuestro territorio, y hay cada vez más gente que lo que apuesta es por preservarlos como espacios naturales y como espacios agrícolas, ¿no? Entonces aquí para mí lo que es importante, y el mensaje final, ¿no?, un poco también de estas jornadas, es que si el 50% de las emisiones de CO2 las estamos generando a través de nuestra pauta de alimentación, nuestra pauta alimentaria, es importante que rápidamente cambiemos esa pauta de producción agrícola y sobre todo de cómo nos tenemos que relacionar con la comida, ¿no? Y ahí en lo que estamos trabajando es en la recuperación de esos espacios y sobre todo en la aplicación de proyectos que integren la agricultura regenerativa, la agricultura del carbono.
So all this effort is to getting people together and moving things towards that change, empowering people, empowering structure, and putting more conscious into the city. And the big change is through culture, educate for new forms that we recuperate, create a job, create happiness, and create and recover land.
Seguir cultivando.
They use leisure and culture like a music festival that gather between 40,000 and 50,000 people to talk about these topics as well. So they have as well a little chiringuito. Chiringuito is a bar in a place in the beach, is del Prat. All this beach was polluted, but they start to clean it up somehow, and now is a white flag, so it's possible to bath and to use it as a beach, and it's a good example on how they do things. They have this other festival that is a food festival of food, world food, because they represent all the citizenship that lives in their city. So they think that food can gather together people and overcome differences.
Pues que la única forma de cambiar nuestra pauta de relación con los alimentos es a través de la agricultura, y la agricultura es la cultura de la relación con la tierra, de la relación lógica con el suelo, y para mí es importante que la gente entienda que solo tenemos una herramienta tan potente como la cultura para que la gente pueda entender que podemos y que tenemos que cambiar esa relación con el mundo y con la alimentación.
In Amsterdam you have per school sometimes 120 different nationalities. So they come from all over the world. And then when you talk to them, there's kids from let's say rich families in the south of Amsterdam that say to me that they have never eaten a cucumber. Or there's kids that say that they've never held an egg. I find this really amazing.
I teach children in Amsterdam, and I teach them experiential learning, and the starting point is food. So it's through food actually that they discover the world around them, not only the nature, the food, but also themselves, because children have the feeling that nature is separated from themselves. So the teaching that I do is not just telling them about food, but where it's experiential. So they're actually cooking, we're cooking together, and then we're reflecting on what that food does to them. And that is already very special, because they have no idea often where the food comes from, and they are not aware of the implications of food. They just maybe think food is something you put in your mouth and then
that's it. But food is the world. On the left, here in the middle and down, you see a wooden panel, which is about the size, let's say 1 meter per 1 meter. This is an educational tool that I developed with the photographer that you'll see later on. And I use that as a visual memory. So we put images of the food in there while we're cooking. So one side has the raw image, and the other side, like for example, like that upstairs, up there. And then you turn it around, and then you see that it's the sugar. So a lot of times they are not aware of how something that they eat a lot, how does it look in a natural way, what the plant is actually. So while we are cooking, this thing is standing there. So they have 1.5 hours of really, let's say, imprinting this image in their heads. And that makes that they will get a feeling of the type of food that they eat without the packaging. I also find it very important that they make, that they can see what is natural food and what is processed food. And what also publicity does with food, because they react very strongly on publicity, you know, and not so much on the food that's in there. But I think if you first get children at their hearts and they want to have a relationship with food, then from there they will get interested. Actually, there is a university now following my lessons to see what's going on. But I just say, just look at the children, look at their reaction. And what happens a lot to me is that they spontaneously start to embrace me. Or they say, I want to live with you. I want to not, you know, because I did it not only in the school, but also in the round tent. They came in the tent and they didn't want to leave the tent anymore. They didn't want to go home. So I thought, you know, these are kids that are really so thirsty that adults take them in this. And not just with good and bad, or so this you shouldn't eat, that you should eat, you know, but really, yeah, do it in a different way. I work in such a way that I want to create, let's say, a key element, a key moment that they lived and that they will not forget. And that's what I also, I try to do with the people here, because I could tell about my project with the children, but there were no children, and you know, they're not there. So I brought a lot of food to taste, and I combined it with soundscapes from a composer friend of mine in Holland, and with pictures of a photographer friend. So to make a real nice, really experience on the food. The two themes of the workshop were salt and were the potato. I brought a potato from Holland, which is a very special potato. It's this little potato. It looks like a normal potato, but this potato was grown by a farmer in Holland who is seeking to grow potatoes that can handle brackish water. And so this potato is very important, is going to be very important in the food security for the future in all kinds of areas.
There's a desire for a viable alternative to the way we currently operate under the current radically, completely unsustainable economic system, which of course impacts how we eat, the type of food we eat, and our very existence on the planet in a sense. And then a third strand, I suppose, was the importance of engagement. I mean, I think it relates to the first two. Can art generate, art generates discourse, but can art generate momentum and change? Can cultural activity build a viable alternative? And you know, is there a need to engage? And I think it was clear from presentations from you know, Eileen Hutton and from Duncan Stewart, and of course from Deirdre Mahoney, that for artists who are socially conscious, for cultural workers that are socially conscious, engagement is a primary method of practice at the minute, and engagement with communities, engagement with research, building that discourse, contributing to that dialogue, and translating that the symbolic gesture into real action.
To me, the big challenge for all of us, civilization on this planet, is how do we get all of us as people, right across the globe, to understand that we're in a massive bubble, and the bubble will burst. And when it bursts, what are the implications for all of us? We're living at a time when the rate of species extinction is happening at between 1,000 and 10,000 times the background rate. The rate of speed of loss has not been on this planet for 55 million years. I think that's really important to I think most probably in this room understand that. But we are living at an incredibly unsustainable time. And when collapses do happen, where will art be? You know, what is the art that we will look back to?
My practice involves building artificial habitats for priority species, namely small bees, small birds, and honeybees. Within the habitats, I create sculptures in collaboration with these animals. At the heart of my practice is the interdependence and interrelation of materials, the creation process, the intended concept, and the finished work. It is the how, the what, and the why. At the heart of my practice is the notion of reciprocity, of fair and mutually beneficial exchange between myself and the natural environment. It is also critical that the processes of my practice be easily replicated, meaning that anybody could do it.
In essence, what Frances and I, and indeed the other artists in this exhibition, are trying to do is reimagine the role of culture, reimagine the role of artistic practice within the world that we live in today. And this is a world that is changing very rapidly. We're facing huge challenges in the form of climate change. And so at the forefront of both of our practice is that notion of bringing a new perspective to make visible the effects of climate change on the world that we live in today.
For the developed world, the science is very clear. We should be now reducing 10% year on year. That's the science. If we want any chance, at least a 50% chance, of holding to 2 degrees. We're on a trajectory at the moment of 4 to 6 degrees. And we look at the greenhouse gas emissions we pumped into the atmosphere, now at 400 parts per million. That moved from 180 to 280 parts for over 800,000 years. It didn't go outside that band for 800,000 years. That's the proven science on it. And yet we're now at 400 parts per million, heading for 700, maybe 800 parts per million in this century. That's where we're going. And we look at the fossil fuel issue. You know, we look at the carbon bubble that's there with fossil fuel. On one level, 4/5 of proven reserves of fossil fuel in the planet can't be burnt if we are to hold to 2 degrees. Yet those massive amounts of carbon emissions, oil, gas, coal, those 3 fuels, and you can include peat here in Ireland because peat is a very carbon-intensive fuel. But if you look at those and look at the amount of, if you like, acids invested globally in these fuels, and know that only 1/5 can be burnt, those acids quite likely will be burnt, unless there's a massive change in attitudes across the world. So how do we bring art? How do we make what Deirdre was talking about last night, and a lot of people are talking about this, and I think to me during this discussion that's coming up, how do we make art, and music too, and other forms of art, the vehicle for creating this dialogue and this change?
Any form of communication that grabs a person by the throat or by the heart is vital. Now, I think a lot of scientists don't do that. They don't really get into that area. But I think it's very, very important for scientists to appreciate that they themselves, talking science, don't necessarily get through to the people I call Sean and Mary citizen. What we really need then is artists, and I don't mean, you know, in the narrow view, to engage with the citizen.
Parmentier is, or was, a French scientist who realized the value of the potato as an anti-famine food and really devoted his whole life to shifting cultural attitudes towards the potato in France in the 18th century. And amongst his very creative actions were the hosting of a feast where all the dishes were composed of potatoes. So we're holding I suppose, an event that echoes that Parmentier feast here tomorrow. We'll have a simultaneous meal here in Ireland and in Miller in Illinois, where Francis has a small holding outside of Chicago. And we'll have a common dinner party using the same plates which we had fired and made for this event, and we'll have a dinner party, 2 different groups of people, 2 sides of the Atlantic, a pan-Atlantic Parmentier.
First I want to welcome all of our guests on both sides of the pond to what I hope will be the first conversation of food and ideas that we might hold here in Miller, a perfect setting for contemplation.
Francis and I have been talking for 6 years. We did not realize, because we have so much to say to each other, we did not realize that we were both making work about the same man, another hero of ours called Vavilov, V.I. Vavilov. Vavilov was a Russian scientist, an extraordinary man who began the notion of seed banks and seed archives. He began to collect seeds in the 1930s, 1928 to the mid-1930s, and he sent out troops of scientists to travel the world to gather seeds and created an extraordinary seed base, database, both in St. Petersburg, what was then Stalingrad.
There's also a role for artists, a very important role, which is to learn and understand the science. Because if you are an artist, or if you don't have a scientific background, then how do you distinguish between good science and bad science? And I think what people have to remember, and many of us know this, is that not only are there good scientists involved in, say, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, in other organizations who are out there trying to raise awareness about climate change, there are also scientists employed by the coal industry, the steel, the automobile industry, and they're paid pretty good money to come up with deliberate misinformation. Which says, oh, climate change is not really happening, it's not caused entirely by human beings, it just as well is actually a natural phenomenon, and in a few years we'll be back to the same climate as we had before again. And that is extremely dangerous, and the ordinary person cannot, unless they've got some ability to discriminate, to look behind where the information has come from, how are they going to fully understand that?
Students on our art and ecology masters also take modules in ecosystem science through NUI Galway, we're an affiliate of NUI Galway, they accredit our degrees. So there's actually a very direct relationship with scientific engagement and then bringing that back into their practice here at the college on campus as well. So what I'm very interested in is, and I think this is starting to happen, you'll see other models of this around the world, is this crossover, this cross-pollination or hybridization between arts, between science, between other disciplines. So that sort of very stratified disciplinary boxing, parsing out and ring fencing of specific academic areas, that enclosure slowly is starting to sort of become a little bit more porous. And the more porous it becomes, the more exciting, the more dynamic, the more possibilities it contains.
We believe in what Joseph Beuys actually famously said, everyone is an artist. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has incredible skill as a painter. It means everybody has the capacity to be creative in whatever they do. So we now, our new vision for the college is basically a hothouse of creativity. We've had a number of climate conversations here, and that's bringing together thinkers from around the world and decision makers, but by bringing them into this environment and by exposing them to poetry and to music and to visual art and to the landscape, they get into a different space, and the discussion and the conversations that happen are of a different quality with very different outcomes. So that is how the college as well can be a place that will make a difference.
For me, the key thing coming out of this symposium is the importance of continuing these, to explore and expand upon these key themes and the need for engagement. Of course, art has many functions. I mean, artists don't necessarily have to set out to change the world. You know, there are many, the cultural practice is multifarious and very open-ended. But I think we're living, to quote filmmaker Adam Curtis, as the title of one of his documentaries, on the desperate edge of now. And for those of us who are socially conscious and concerned about the precarious nature of our economic and environmental sustainability, it's time for a paradigm shift. And so I think there was a lot of productive discussion on the role that artists and culture workers can play in moving this debate forward.